Let's start. So quick show of hands, please. How many of you are .NET developers? Okay. How many of you are Java developers? Okay. So the truth is, my story is a bit of a mix. I started being a .NET developer. I worked at .NET shops. I was working on RavenDB, doing a lot of .NET stuff, really hardcore. About a year ago, I just moved to a Java company, working on the Java stack, and I'm still doing both. So that's good that you are most of you are .NET developers, because apparently I didn't plan it, but somehow all the interesting web frameworks are in the .NET stack. So we are going to look a lot at the .NET stack. I am going to show some Java stuff. I think there is place to look at the Java web frameworks. They do offer some really nice things, and we will be looking at that. So the original plan was to do some sort of actual comparison. That is, to go through like each and every web framework there is and saying, this is how it works, this is how this is what it offers, this is the ecosystem that it offers. That's not what we are going to do today. It is a bit boring. You can do that yourself by actually sitting, I don't know, 3 or 4 days and doing a lot of Google. I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do is tell a story, basically. Is just showcase how the web frameworks evolved over the time, show some opinions, some decision making people working on web frameworks did, and hopefully allow you to make some conscious decision when approaching writing a web application, which web framework will suit you best. I was actually quite surprised at how long or what the length of the way a lot of web frameworks worked, and this is what we are going to see today. All of what I'm going to show you is opinions. Is basically how I see things, or when I see a web framework, what I'm looking for, or what I don't know, how I came to use it, how I found it comfortable for me. It's just my opinions. I'll be more than happy if we have some sort of even a debate. One more thing is I'm going to show some demos. Demos ranging from various, just close this, various even operating systems. Something is bound to break, but hopefully it will just work. Okay, so I work for a company in Israel called Bazilla. That company is doing a lot of media research, basically. We index a lot of data coming from the internet, reading a lot of what people think, what people read in social networks, in blogs, in news websites, etc. I'm going to talk tomorrow about the actual work that we did recently, taking our infrastructure and putting it in a way that can fit the cloud, basically scaling out in huge scales. And I started working there around a year and a half ago, and as I said, I'm going to talk tomorrow about the actual work we did, but what I came to see is that the web interface, we provide software as a service, as one of our services, and that's basically was one website that actually did everything. And the code base looked like that. So part of the work that we did was actually to take this thing that's called the Bazilla software as a service and break it down. And one of the moving parts that we had to do is basically the web interface. And that's where it was introduced to the complexity or the decision making that has to be made when selecting a web framework. So this talk is basically what I learned from that process. As I said, we are a Java shop, so a lot of what we did was in Java, but apparently there is a lot of really nice things going into .NET, and we will be looking at that. So what this talk is, as I said, this is a very bird's view showcase of web frameworks. I'm going to show a lot of .NET, but again, it is only my opinions, and I really, really, really would like to hear if any of you think differently or think that I missed a framework and I didn't present it, or I didn't present any framework correctly, honestly. Hopefully this talk will inspire some of you to actually take something and build something really interesting, because I think there is a lot of room for improvement in the actual ecosystem of web frameworks, either in Java or .NET. What this talk is not is basically, I'm not going to recommend using any specific web framework. I really think it really depends on your scenario, on your stack, on what you're trying to do. I will not be covering all the possible frameworks because, as you will see, a lot of stuff really repeats itself. And I'm not going to go over arguments over, how RESTful an application should be, or is MVC same thing as MVVM or stuff like that. I'm also not going to do performance comparisons. For me, a web framework is not as good as its performance. Sometimes a low performing web framework can be a lot better than than another framework. So our agenda, I'll do some talking, some history, and then we'll go and see .NET web framework. We'll move to Java web frameworks. That's going to be the shorter part. And then we'll go and look in some single page applications, what they are, what we can do with them. And if you wish, I don't see any laptop, but if you wish, you can follow along. I have this GitHub repository here. It has some sources of what we are going to look at. Okay. Yeah, no, but I will put them available. They are not available right now. So it's my surname's in Hershko. Just go there and you'll see that. It's the top. I just pushed today or last night. So what is a website? For you, if you come and I'll tell you, build a website, what is a website for you? What should a website do, as you see it?
Serve content to clients.
Sorry?
Serve content to users.
Okay, what is content?
Resources.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And where do you get it from?
Database.
Possibly. Okay. So a website will usually take data from somewhere, either a database or service running somewhere, not necessarily within my my infrastructure, right? It can go and do some external requests, and that website is going to do something with the data and serve it for the user to see, right? So we have three components basically, right? I have the database or the data store or whatever, where I take the data from. I have my website, which back in the day was CGI or maybe, okay, you can see that, ISAPI. And basically I will do some processing with that data, right? And I will produce HTML output. That's basically what we had all the time with websites. We even went further and actually said that the website will do everything for us. So if you remember back in the day when we were doing web development, we would actually have the entire logic, everything contained within the actual website. So for me, it all started with ASP Classic. Can you see that? Okay. That's ASP Classic right there. I will choose better colors next time. So for me, it was ASP Classic where I started my web development. It was all like, pages and stuff. For me, the composition OOP pattern was basically take some pages and do server-side includes on them and just serve the result to the user. And the actual pages were doing the entire logic, right? And whenever I wanted to access a web page, to access a part of the website, I had to call the server and tell it to serve me that specific page, right? And that page would go through compilation, or if it's ASP Classic, just the interpreter would go over it, and I will just get served that page processed after getting the data it needs, right? So it was all very, I don't know, it does look a bit oldish, but maybe for some of you this is still how you work today. But websites did come a very long way. So it has a lot of disadvantages. It can break. It doesn't necessarily look very good, but it worked. And as long as it worked, we continued moving forward. And then came Microsoft and gave us ASP.NET Webforms. They actually, this was my first, the first time I actually used .NET. This is the first time I started using .NET was using the Webforms. I don't think I did WinForms before that. But what Microsoft basically did was take the the WinForms, the actual way you build desktop applications, and threw that into a web server concept. So it basically mixed two things, right? It took the concepts that we have in ASP Classic, which is the HTTP, the session state, the caching, so all sort of same things that you see in a server, in a web server, and combined that along with VB6 stuff for doing desktop applications. So suddenly you had events, you had controls, you had to compile and run, hit F5. This thing is still with us today. You have to hit Control F5 to actually see changes, not in views, but in code. And you'll see that other web frameworks don't necessarily require that. So Microsoft, I don't know, maybe tried to innovate, but somehow it got it really wrong. It took something that belongs to the desktop, it belongs to building desktop applications, and threw that into a server. And again, it did work. I actually built quite nice websites with that. But something is really, really broken in the concept. So let's start talking about web frameworks. What are we looking for when we're talking about a web framework? So we know what a website is. We know how we used to make websites. How would you actually, what would you expect from a web framework that you want to start using? Or what you have in your current web framework that you like? Let's do it like that. Yeah. Okay. Think less about presentation logic. Be able to work faster. Sorry? Okay. It should be testable and easy to test.
Conventions.
What do you mean by conventions?
Well, where to place things.
Okay. What do you care about that?
Because then, well, it makes work easier. So you don't have to look for, I don't know.
Because something dictates where you should put stuff, and then you don't have to think, maybe.
There may be, well, there are rules for the game that you should
Okay.
if you choose a web framework.
I hear you. Okay. Yeah. Why do you care about cross compatibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, have customers in different states or browsers.
Oh, so you mean browsers? So the HTML you output should render correctly in all devices. Okay. Okay, so that's a lot of really interesting things. That's the list I came up with. Okay. Basically, a web framework should produce HTML and correct HTML and cross-compatible HTML. We are going to revisit that a bit later. It should have a good ecosystem, right? I should be able to do everything that I want. If I need to start using a new technology, something that just came about and everyone is like excited about it, so I need to be able to do that fairly quickly. And I don't know, either by writing a plugin or on my own, or the community would do something for me. It should be easy to use, productive. I don't need to, bang my head against the wall trying to do something. It should be really fast, right? It should not block on requests. We will see that. It should be very scalable if I want to be able to have dozens of servers running my website because I need to scale out. I have too many users, too much data to serve. I need to be able to do that. I want the community and documentation to be thorough. Right? I want to be able to move fast, right? And I need to, perhaps that's something that is really important for me. I want to be able to write a website without thinking. I want to start something fresh, and hopefully we'll have time today to actually really do that in action today. I want to start like a new project from scratch and be able to come up with it in a day or two. I actually did that last week. So it is possible, and it is very important for me. For startups, for example, it's very important. You have an idea, you want to just bring it about, and if you need to now you need to learn a new framework and it will take you 2 weeks, then I pity you. And then there's the extensibility, pluggability we mentioned earlier. I want to be able to, I need my web framework to actually be able to accept additions, even if the original creators didn't think of them. So, sharp turn. After realizing their mistake, or I don't know why, Microsoft released Asp Net Mvc, right? So MVC is not something unique to Microsoft. It's actually a pattern, and a lot of web framework actually used that for quite a long time before Microsoft did. And MVC basically stands for Model View Controller. So how many of you are not familiar with MVC? Great. So the idea is basically, okay, I need to select better colors next time for tomorrow. So the idea is basically to have the 3 main parts of the web applications completely separated, right? So I want to have my data, or the representation of my data, in one part of the application. I want to have the representation part in a completely different part. So if, for example, a new iPad comes out and it breaks, Internet Explorer comes out and it breaks HTML compatibility, so I need to be able to respond very fast. I don't need my database to know about those changes, right? So I need to be able to somehow break things apart very efficiently. So that's the view. And there's the controller, where the actual business logic happens, or some of the business logic happens. I will have most of my business logic in my model. I will have the controller be able to respond. My controller will basically be my application, right? It will know how to respond to various requests coming from the views, the UI. So this is how it should look like, right? I have the model, which is pure data, or pure conversation with my database, with my REST services, or whatever. I have the controller, where the actual business magic happens, right? This is where I'm doing my application. And I have my views, which should be dumb HTML, right? Because all they care about is just presenting stuff. So if I get a request for a page, for example, Stack Overflow, I want to display the main page of Stack Overflow, then my controller will get a request. It will go to the model, right, to the database. It will create the actual models, the actual data entities. I've just got those data entities. I will process them for display and send them to the views. So the views get something that has been prepared, and all they have to do is display it, right? Wrong, because this is what actually happens in most applications. So who can say that in his application it doesn't have this problem? Silence. So I mean, if everyone does that mistake, we don't really have a choice, right? Because we need to sometimes fix things faster. We need to sometimes move fast. Sometimes it just takes too much abstraction to get to that point. So we just end up being here. And that's bad, because we break a pattern, or we break something that is very, very good, and we really want to be there. So the question is, either we should try harder making this separation, or maybe we should try and go somewhere else, think of other options. Let's look at the request cycle. In the usual request cycle, when a request comes into a web server, this is specifically the image that you see here is the ASP.NET request cycle. This is what happens basically. The web browser sends a request. That request is being transferred from HTTP request to an object, to something that the actual framework can work with. And then it goes through routing. Okay, you approached some URL with some data and possibly with some headers, HTTP headers, and you will end up somewhere in some controller, in some action, right? You'll get to a point where you have to somehow take that request and do some magic with it. So this is happening here. You have the routing mechanism, which varies from web framework to web framework. And then you have the MVC handler, which will execute a controller and a controller action. And this is where everything will, all your business logic will happen. Once you've done processing, you'll send out the response, right? So the response stream starts here. So you have the action sending something, some view result in our case. That view result is going to go to the view engine, right, assuming HTML. That view engine will know what to do with that view result using some sort of a view that usually the action will dictate. And after processing the view, you will have the actual result, which is sent back to the browser, and then the user will see the actual response. The action is going to do a lot of stuff that it really doesn't have to do. And you probably have seen that. So in your action method, okay, you will usually have not only your business logic, you also handle authentication. You will also handle model binding, either taking the request and creating objects out of it and processing that, further validating that request, etc. If you need to access database or a database from that action, you will initialize the unit of work you're going to start using if you use an ORM, for example. And when you finally completed the processing, you will send a result, and that result will do some sort of formatting, right? It will do some extra cleanup of the unit of work. It will do error reporting if necessary. So that's quite a lot of work, but it should really happen before and after the action. A lot of times we end up having that entire logic happening within the action itself. You actually write that code in that action. So again, something is really doesn't work in the way that we do things today. So we have two components I want to briefly look at. So we have the routing, right? With ASP.NET MVC, we usually do some sort of it's some sort of a configuration, right? So you declare a routing table, and that routing table has some rules, regex or whatever, but it will usually be on the side of the configuration way of doing things. You can also do things like a convention-based routing. You can say, this is how I name my classes. This is how I want you to process. So ASP.NET MVC really starts with conventions, but it really quite fast drifts back to configuration because suddenly you want to start doing some custom things. Finally, we have the view rendering. So we usually have a lot of view languages or templating languages, and they are not in par with the actual language that we use. This is, for example, why Microsoft released Razor, one of the reasons, because it's basically C#. So you have some new syntax to learn, but it's basically C#. That's not always the case. A lot of times you will end up having views running on top of templating language, which has nothing to do with the actual language that you use. And that's a learning curve. That's something that you don't really want to have. And obviously, you want to be able to debug the views. Sometimes you might want to even actually test the views. So let's start looking at .NET Web Frameworks. The .NET ecosystem, very short, we have for package management with something called NuGet. Who's familiar with NuGet? Awesome. For those of you, I will introduce it in a sec. So we have the NuGet as a packaging management tool. It is very easy to start working with, and it's basically if you want a web framework, you just build an application and catch the web framework that you want, or any other package for that matter. We have build systems. We usually, in .NET, we don't use build systems much because we rely on Visual Studio, and that's fine. But when we want to release stuff, it's very easy. It's very good to actually rely on PowerShell scripts or Saki, which is a very nice build system. And a lot of times with .NET, we come to a point where we care about mono compatibility, right? We want to be able to run on mono. Now, I really don't get it why Microsoft doesn't work with the mono team or incorporate that project into .NET or somehow help them, because I don't know, maybe Microsoft doesn't have any reason to run on top of Linux, but we as developers, a lot of times we do want that. So a lot of web frameworks we're going to look at are going to actually take mono into consideration. They would want to be able to run on mono, to be able to natively support mono. So that's something we will be looking at. And as I mentioned, we have this issue of recompilation, right? So in all of the web frameworks that at least I'm aware of, if you make code changes, you have to recompile your code explicitly. You have to do Control F5 or F5, otherwise it won't catch. If you know of anything to bypass that, please let me know. If you do make changes to views, however, views, you don't have to compile the actual workflow. You don't have to use compilation. So we looked at that. Let's talk about some more characteristics of actual ASP.NET MVC. So you have in ASP.NET MVC, you have, let's see that in code. So this is the project from my GitHub. So we have, whenever I start with ASP.NET MVC, I'm looking at the global ASAX, because for me that's the entry point of the application. At least this is where it starts, right? So we can see there is area registration. We can see there is route config. Web API config I will ignore for now. I'll discuss this later. Oh, sorry. Wow, it took you a long time to tell me that. Okay. So we have, again, this is my project, right? There's the web frameworks we're going to look at. And then we have this. We have the area registration within my global ASAX. We have the route config. We have the web API config, which I said we'll ignore for now because I don't really like it. We have auth and bundle and filter config, which is basically the MVC's way of actually allowing you some extensibility. And we'll discuss this in a bit. So let's take a look at the route config. We go and we see that we sort of declare a convention, right? We say that this is a convention, right? So I'm saying that I want all my controllers to, I want all my URLs to work like that, to have the declaration of the controller in the first part, the second part is the action, and the last part is some sort of a parameter. And then I have a control over that, providing defaults and everything. And then I end up being here. For example, the home controller, right? So I have my action method within my controller. My controller has to derive from a base class. Okay, that's also something we will see that is not all web frameworks require. And then we have the actual return, and we return a view, and I can actually say that I want to use that specific view, right? I can say I can specify the view name. If I don't specify the view name, there is some convention going on, and basically this is the action method, and I can have multiple action methods within my controller, right? Let's go back for a sec. So I have a controller class containing actions, right? I have the routes table, which I have to declare, or at least some default, sane default does come bundled. And then every URL is going to be processed using the routes table that I just defined. So the view is actually going to be used using Razor, which is C#. The view is actually strongly typed. Okay, so I can say this view, its option is strongly typed. This view works on top of this model, right? And then anyone wants me to actually show views? Anyone not feeling comfortable with Razor? I can show that. Just want to move forward. Okay. And then we have scaffolding support. Because the views are actually strongly typed, I can actually produce a view out of a model, and I can, for example, automatically create a form using that actual model entity. And there is validation built in, because now my models can have small attributes that say this specific property is required, or this is a validation rule for that. And everything is really, really nicely wired. It is testable, but only to some extent. Okay, we will see later that some web frameworks do some really nice things with testing. And because of the way that MVC is structured, for example, we don't have IOC, inversion of control, or dependency injection. So we have some context classes which basically contain a lot of context on a lot of stuff. So if you authenticate it, then we'll have a user context. If you, I don't know, content negotiation, we'll have, every time I want to move some data between the parts here, I will have to use some context class, and it will have to be defined in some weird wiring. Now, whenever we create a Asp.NET MVC application, what happens today in MVC4 at least, what happens is that the actual framework is based on a lot of small components, small libraries, if you will. And what ASP.NET MVC does is get all of those packages, all of those libraries from some sort of a remote repository. That's NuGet. Right? So you can do install package and the name of the package, and you'll get it into your application. So this is what ASP.NET MVC does, but look at the amount of packages that it brings. Right? So a lot of stuff is really necessary. So we have all the web pages, web API, data. We can say that web infrastructure. All the actual MVC framework is contained within packages. That's just fine. But for some weird reason, Microsoft gives us Knockout.js, which is a data binding JavaScript framework, jQuery, entity framework. Now it also dictates what type of database or ORM we are going to use. That's a lot of decision making that is already made for us. I don't really like it. So let's talk a bit about the actual views of ASP.NET MVC. So they are modular. So I can actually write a view, right? I can write an HTML, and I can say that, okay, most of this HTML I want to reuse somewhere else. So back in the day we had master pages. That's basically still what we have today. We can do partials. We can do sections. A lot of tools that Razor or the ASP.NET MVC view engine gives us to be able to reuse a lot of views that we have. We can also contain a lot of views together and say this is an area. So if I have a master page, for example, I can actually have master page for the actual website, and then master page for my admin section, a master page for the user section, etc., etc. So I can actually build one web application with a lot of areas, and each area is going to be completely different. That's areas are also being used for controllers, for conventions, and so on. But then the question comes, how can I move data between the actual parts of the views, right? So in the example that I just showed you, we had an action method, and that action method returned a model for display. Now, what happens if I want to display that model, but I also want to display in the rest of the page, I want to show more data. For example, I want to show the actual, for example, Stack Overflow. I have all the list of questions, and that list of questions is just the list of questions, but I also want to display the user login. I want to show the list of popular tags, and so on and so forth. So I can't really move that thing around. So if I return a view and tell the view that this is your model that you're going to process. So this is where the view bag comes in. That's one of the ways to do that. The view bag is basically something that is accessible from both the controller and the views, right? And then you pass the actual model to your view, and the view processes your model. And whenever it needs additional stuff, for example, from the master or from the partial, it will go to the view bag and ask the property from the view bag. The view bag is basically a dictionary, right? You ask it, give me the object under that key, and then you have some sort of, it is a bit fragile, but the view knows that it needs to look for an object under a certain key, and the controller provides it under that key, and then you have a match, and then you can render really sophisticated views. But there is a better way to do that. I can still do that view bags can be used in a strongly typed manner. You can still use the Razor ability to do strongly typed things, but there is a better way. I can actually, instead of returning the model that I know of from the actual database, I can create something that's called view model. A view model is basically a class that represents the actual view. So if I have, again, let's go to Stack Overflow route again. I have the main screen of Stack Overflow, and we can say that the model of the main screen is a list of questions. So we have some additional data to display, like the username, the list of tags, and so on. But those kind of things can go in the view bag. In the view model approach, what I will do is basically create a class that's called home view model, and that class is going to contain properties, which one of them will be the questions, and then I will have more properties, which are the actual additional stuff that I want to show, which is the list of tags, the username, and so on. And then I'm just returning a view, and the view accepts that view model as its model. And that is a very nice way of doing things. However, that basically means that for every view you have to have a class. And whenever you change a view, you have to go back and change the class. Now you don't have to only change the class, you now have to change the way that the controller uses the class, and etc. And for example, you have different behavior on different kind of things, it makes things a lot more complicated. So view models do give us a lot of, this example here is basically if I want to show a list of customers or a customer form, and I want to show a drop-down list of all the states for the user to select from. So my model is a customer, right? But I want to somehow provide a list of states. So one way of doing that is actually sending the customer as the model and use the view model, the view bag for the states, and I will bind that list of states from my view bag in my view. And the view model of doing that is providing a customer form view model, for example, and that will have one row, one property for the user, customer, and one property for the states, for the list of states. So there is, there are trade-offs, what to use. I personally don't like the view models approach. It is too much coding, too much. You end up having tons of classes, tons of files. I don't like it. It does help a lot with caching, though. So it's really, for your consideration. So I want to move on from ASP.NET MVC. It is quite evidently the industry standard, especially if all of you guys are .NET and most of you raised your hands that you say you're using ASP.NET MVC. That's basically what most people are using, and that's fine. However, you can only run that on IIS. This a bit changes today because we have a lot of OWIN stuff. We'll talk about that later. We don't have dependency injection built in, and I'm going to show you in just a second how that can be really useful. It's not so much composable. You have all those context classes lying around, and extensibility is done via filters, via a lot of really hardcore stuff that you don't really want to get into a lot of times. And if for some really advanced stuff, so there is a lot of advanced stuff that if you can actually do, it will require a lot of work, and that's really a problem. And then we end up with a lot of people saying that ASP.NET MVC is slow. I don't know. I haven't used ASP.NET MVC that much, but apparently it uses the slowest JSON parser on the market, and etc. etc. I don't know. People say, I believe them. Let's move on to the Fubo project. Now, anyone heard of that? The Fubo project, Fubo MVC? Okay. That's another approach of doing MVC. The Fubo project is some sort of an umbrella project for, it has more projects than I'm showing here. It's basically, the Fubo core is some sort of a commons DLL. It has a lot of stuff in it, a lot of unrelated stuff. And it has some components, and basically the Fubo MVC takes those components and builds on top of them, a self-hosted MVC web framework. Now, that web framework is really interesting. It has strong focus on pluggability. That is, I can actually take a request stream, and I can actually build my endpoint, for example, my action method, and I can take each and every part before and after and replace that. I will show that in a second. And for that, and they don't actually require you to have a controller class. Okay, all you have to have is some action method, is some executable code that will do whatever you want. I put the URL here. This is a massive document. Sorry, this is the example project. So it all starts with the Fubo registry. It's basically where you define that composability. I will show that in a second. And this is where you define how you discover your actions. Okay, where this is some sort of a convention settings that it has something that comes out of the box, and that convention is going to discover where your actions are within your MVC application, and will just be able to route the URLs to it. Before moving on, let me show you some code. So the Fubo MVC project, it's really small. You can actually see, compared to my MVC project, it's really some really small amount of files. And it all starts here. I have a Bootstrapper, right? To be able to actually make the composition of the moving parts that Fubo MVC has, I have to somehow be able to tell Fubo or .NET to actually compose those kind of parts. So this is where it happens. I have a Bootstrapper, basically like the global ASAX, and it fires up and puts all the pieces together in the place they have to be. There is a registry, Fubo registry class, which basically contains all the routes and policies and models and all of those conventions. And there is a Fubo application which wires things up automatically. It has some default conventions, and this is what I'm using here. What it's very configurable, obviously, but what it does, it just looks for all classes with an endpoint or endpoints suffix, right? So you can write whatever class you want, you suffix it with endpoint or endpoints in plural, and you get back, and this class is going to be caught. Now, the way it is going to work, it's going to look at the actual prefix and use that for the actual prefix here and the actual action name, and it will use that to compose the URL, pretty much like you know from ASP.NET Mvc. Great, I have errors. What? I did not expect this error. Okay, so it was working. So what will actually happen now is that this, okay, that's really annoying. Just a second. Sorry about that. So the endpoint classes declare a method. Sorry, I can't run this now. They will expect a model in, okay? It uses a convention called one model in, zero model out, zero model in, one model out, or zero model in, one model in, one model out. So you have to, it expects one class as its parameter, or zero, okay? And it will have to return some sort of a model. Now, it heavily uses the view model approach that we talked about. You will have to declare something like that, some sort of a class, and that view model class is going to be sent to the view. And what Fubo gives us is basically two things. You can actually create an actions that are separated from a convention, and build up your own convention in a story type manner. And there is actually everything is very. I know I wanted to show you a demo and it doesn't work. Sorry about that, but everything is actually being configured through the Bootstrapper. So, for example, I can say, here's I want you to find my actions. So I say include classes suffixed with controller, or include classes suffixed with an endpoint, which is what we have by default. I change this here, obviously. I can say where I want you to find my classes, my classes containing actions. I can work on the routes. I can change the actual route resolution policies. There is quite a lot of we can do here. Sorry, the demo doesn't work. We have another project coming up. It's called Nancy. It has similar properties. I hope I can run this one. So we have everything is basically built in a very composable manner. If I wanted to have something happening before an action or after an action, I can just do this using what's called the behaviors pipeline. I just declare a behavior, which is a class that takes the request and has access to the response, and it will do everything. It's similar to what you would do in a filter in ASP.NET MVC, but it's the way it's working. It's much more modular, much easier to use, and it's basically it employs the Russian doll model. And it's again, it's very convention. It's heavily convention based. So I don't think there is even a way to do configuration in Fubo MVC. One other really nice thing about Fubo MVC is the assets pipeline. So the way that I can handle static files. So we didn't talk about that in ASP.NET MVC, but basically there we have a folder called the content folder, right? And I just drop everything static in there, and that's just there. In Fubo MVC, I can actually treat assets or static files in a much, I don't know, healthier, if you want, way. I can say that here is my date picker activator or whatever, some JavaScript that I wrote, and I can say that it requires jQuery, and Fubo MVC will know to fetch or to inject that dependency, that JavaScript line in your view automatically. Now, Fubo MVC supports more than one view engine. Here, what I have here is the Sparkvue Engine, which is really it's a separate project. It's not related to Fubo MVC. I think you can actually use that from ASP.NET MVC. It's quite nice actually. It's instead of writing code, you write HTML. So you declare your view model as the first line here, which is basically saying what's the model that this view is going to work on, and then you have the, I don't know, some iteration over a list, and you can output links, etc., etc. So it's a nice view model, and obviously Fubo supports Razor as well, but that's just something else I want to show. One other really interesting feature of Fubo MVC is the ability to create bottles. So you have, for example, in ASP.NET MVC, we have areas, right? We can break up a site into several parts. So what Fubo MVC does is basically it allows you to take some sort of an area. It's not an area there, but you take what you would consider as an area and package it in a bottle. Now, this bottle is going to contain all your resources, all your classes, everything, and you'll be able to just pass them around. So if I have a project which uses some sort of a really nice behavior, even JavaScript behavior that I wrote, I can just pass it around to other projects of mine or to friends of mine and so on, and they will be able to just add that bottle to their application. It's called a bottle because whenever you take it's contained, and whenever you take it, you break it. And then all the content stuff, all the static stuff is also available through from the original MVC application. That's a really nice technology. It can actually be used, I haven't tried it, but it can actually be used from non-Fubo MVC applications. You can use that technology from wherever, but it's their technology and it's been heavily used there. For example, they have the Fubo autocomplete and Fubo localization, all the modules that add, additional stuff on top of the actual MVC framework. A lot of usability stuff is being packed as a bottle, and you can just download it from NuGet. Really interesting stuff. Also, validation works like that. I can't run it, so I can't show you the actual diagnostics, but it has a dedicated diagnostics endpoint. And let's move on. But basically, Fubo MVC relies on Fubo Core. Fubo Core provides a lot of ecosystem tools that are really useful. For example, the cache, the model bindings, a lot of helpers, really nice. Moving on to NancyFX. Now, NancyFX, which I have stickers for here, is a really nice project. And it started as just a second. It started as a .NET support or a web framework inspired by Sinatra. Anyone heard of Sinatra? Great. So Sinatra is the way you would do web development on Ruby on Rails if you didn't want to use the actual Rails framework. So it has a really nice concept. You declare your module, which is basically your controller for our purpose, and within that you declare a route and tell your route to do something. So you basically, you attach a lambda, a function, to a route. And that's the idea behind the Sinatra framework. It's really nice. It's being used in a lot of places. NancyFX is I think it's the only implementation in the .NET framework. And that's a whole application, basically, a whole Nancy application. And that application can be tweeted. It's so short that it fits in 130 characters. So you have a URL, and you define a function. Now, what do you return? Nancy, it does have a view engine, and obviously it supports both Razor and Spark, and it has even its own view engine, templating language. But it does a lot of really interesting stuff. For example, this endpoint here that I just declared, it will return a string, and it will not go through any views. So Nancy knows how to take different kind of things, and we'll see that in just a second, and return them in a very natural way. So you don't have to return a view result. You don't have to return some declarative or class or something that is really tied into the framework. You can just return something and tell Nancy what to do with it, because Nancy is also very highly configurable. So the things that contain those definitions, those URL to function definitions, are called modules. And Nancy detects all the classes that derive from a Nancy module and registers them into a routing table. So you will have Nancy automatically creates its own routing table, and it will find all those classes that derive from Nancy module, and it will declare an endpoint based on their prefix, and after their prefix it will add those endpoints that you declared within the constructor. It's very interesting. What's even more interesting is Nancy supports out-of-the-box dependency injection. So you can register using an IOC container that Nancy comes with. You can register some class. For example, if you wanted to use RavenDB or some other data provider, you can actually tell Nancy you can put it here as a constructor parameter and register it outside in the Nancy Bootstrapper. Tell Nancy that whenever you see a constructor requesting that type, you can just create this object here, and you don't have to do anything. You just add this parameter here, and Nancy will initialize it for you. Very, very easy to do and very efficient. So what they love to call themselves is the super duper happy path. So you can basically just write code without thinking. It works really nicely. I have a demo. Hopefully it will work. The community is very, very active. I don't know, it's one of the biggest .NET open source projects. Obviously, Fubo MVC is open source as well. I didn't say that. And it has a very configurable code base. So also the request pipeline is very, very modular. You can actually add before and after hooks, and you can do a lot of really nice things. Let's see some Nancy code. Please compile. Oh my God. Huge demo fail. Internal failure. Anyone seen that before? MS build. Second. Any questions so far till I try to load it up again? Yeah. Stupid software. So that's Nancy. Maybe we can show Fubo later. But so we have the Bootstrapper, basically the same idea like in Fubo. I have to have some class that actually does the wiring. So I didn't do anything. I'm using the default right now. But the idea is that here I actually did make some changes to enable diagnostics, which I'll show you in a bit. But this is where I had to do this, right? So if I want to configure the web framework, I'm doing this from code within the Bootstrapper. So whenever I'm running a project with Nancy, it will look for the Bootstrapper, it will run it. The Bootstrapper itself will do some sort of, again, it will look for classes extending Nancy module, and will do a lot of stuff. So this is what happens here. My way of, this is my demo, right? So I'm creating an index module. If I wanted, for example, to have RavenDB instance, all I have to do is put an iDocument session here. This is the dependency injection. And I will register this convention here in the Bootstrapper somewhere. I will tell the Nancy IOC container to resolve that that class into that instance into this concrete instance, and so on. So that's dependency injection. So I also have a view bag. That's basically the views will work as you would expect them to. I also have, I can define obviously multiple endpoints. I can say either it's a get or a post. I can take this one out and reuse this code if I want to. The routes, I can actually do parsing of query string parameters immediately out of the actual route itself. I can use regex routes, Nancy routing. So it's all really well documented. You have patterns. You have like the importance of patterns, or how it rates it, scoring, and so on. It's really nice. But what else did I want to show here? Sorry, it threw me off, that demo failure. So, okay, so basically, up until the point that you return a view, everything works really different, right? So the way we have no controllers, we basically we have modules, and each module declares routes, and basically you declare routes within code, which is something I'm not sure is a very smart decision to make a lot of times. Because sometimes you do want flexibility, so there are ways to actually do this in a more conventional way, but Nancy is really heavy on this type of things, that you define, sorry, just a second, you define a URL within your actual module, yeah?
So I'm just wondering if the parameters that get passed through that function, what's the type of those
What, you mean this one, the indexer?
The well, so you've got so the get there is taking in a like a language, so like a function basically that's accepting that parameters.
You mean this one?
Sorry, so just where you've got the p there.
Where is the lambda here? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, so when you actually use, if you want to change anything in the parameter collection that's getting passed in there, do you have to do any casting or anything like that?
Yeah, this is some sort of a dynamic. Yeah, you'd have to do that. I don't have it here, but yeah. You will have. It doesn't know the type. I think maybe they added that. I don't know, but you don't have the type here. So you would have p.id. Okay, so you just named it. You say that whenever some text or whatever here comes, the URL has to have /view/something, right? And that something here, you just know, you can now refer that by name, and the name you gave it is ID. Okay? You can also have something like that. ID equals something, right? Not here, but whenever it's passed in the URL itself, you can still access it using p.id.
Is that just a string? p.id?
It's not. It doesn't know what it is. It's a dynamic. P is a dynamic.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so it doesn't know what it is. It will. You just cast it. You just do something like string p.id, and you have a string for it.
Yeah, I was basically just wondering if there was a way to kind of strongly type the parameters that you were passing.
I'm not sure. If it will be there, you'll probably have to define it somewhere here. But I don't know. I don't think there is right now. You do have this bit here, though. Whenever you do a post, for example, you can tell it to bind the post parameters, the form parameters, into this object here. And it will all happen automatically. Now, ASP.NET Mvc actually has it nicer, right? You can just have this type within the action signature. You're aware of that? You can just put the action, within the action signature, you put a model or a class name, and it will just do the binding for you. Here it's a bit more explicit, but it works nicely. So up until that point, it's very different, right? So we declare a URL within our modules. Here, for example, I said that I want my module to be under, I want it to have some sort of a prefix. But from now on, whenever I return a view, it's pretty much the same as we know from ASP.NET Mvc, which brings us to the next question. So we have the diagnostics. I can show it here. Oh, you can't see anything on that screen. I think it's Nancy. Yeah. So I defined it in my. What? This is what I defined in the Bootstrapper. I gave it a password, which is 12345. 2345. Okay. So I can now see. Where's my mouse? Okay. I can now see everything that happens within my website. I can do request tracking, live requests. I can do, I don't know, interactive diagnostics, which is basically I can build modules to be displayed right here. I can see the actual information on what's configured in the pipeline. I have the route cache, route resolver, which is a class that defines some sort of conventions. I have the view resolver. Again, some class that defines conventions on how to find views based on the models that have been passed to it. You have the view provider locator, something. Model binder locator. You have everything configurable. I can actually tell Nancy to look for views in another website or in a database or in anything. Everything that you see listed here can be swapped with another implementation of something else. Yeah, so let's move on. And Nancy obviously can run self-host. I don't have to use ASP.NET MVC as the host. I can just create a console application, and that console application is going to just run a web server, a website, whatever. Nancy can self-host itself. So another thing Nancy is very opinionated about, I'll talk about this quickly. ASP.NET MVC lets you move stuff using static constructs, right? You have the session cache or whatever you can access. Nancy doesn't have that. If you want to move data between the different parts of the request cycle, you'll just use an Nancy context, which is a construct that's being passed around in the pipeline between those modules. Moving on, this is something I really want to show. Can anybody tell me what's wrong in this picture? This is going back to like the beginning of the talk. We saw this image. We said this is my data. This is my web application. And it sends the actual HTML back to my user to be viewed. Something is actually really wrong here. Yeah. No, assume there is an error here back. Good, it's a good one though. Okay, so it actually, my website actually assumes quite a bit, right? It assumes my user is using a browser, and it's assuming quite a lot of things. What if my user is, for example, what if my web application is a blog engine and my user is now an RSS aggregator? Now, I don't want to provide it with my blog in HTML. I want to provide it with an actual JSON or XML representation of that. So content negotiation is really something that goes on a lot today. You want to be able to have your web framework know what content to send. You don't necessarily have to send back HTML. So in Nancy, for example, I don't have to send back a view. I can actually send back this here again. This is my home screen, right? I'm getting a list of questions. I'm setting some stuff in the view back, and I'm sending back a view. Now I don't have to do that. I can actually send the actual data that I got. Right. So let's go to Postman is pretty much like Fiddler, if you know that. It's a way for me to generate HTTP requests and get the responses. So I have, if for example I have the Nancy application running obviously, and I'm sending the response, I will get back the HTML of the list of fake overflow question. This is the demo application that I built. Now if I'm sending to the endpoint that I declared here, which is /API, I'm going to get pretty much the same. No, it's 500. Okay. Why it's a 500, I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, because unable to locate view. And it tells me what views it looked for. So that's basically because I'm sending back. I will get back to this in a second. Now, for example, if I want to get, I don't want to get a text HTML. I want to get a JSON from that endpoint here, right? /API, which is this one. All I do, I load the list of questions and return my actual view model or actual model. So I will change my HTTP header to be application JSON and send it. And I will get the list of questions as JSON, serialized as JSON. I can also do that for XML. I just have to change my header and then do all of that for me automatically. Now, I can say that I want text HTML, and Nancy will try to find a matching view. But the reason it fails because of the naming conventions. The naming convention that is configured for Nancy right now doesn't allow it to find a list for a view for something that's called list tag 1, which is the LI name for a list of questions. But if I had this, for example, if I changed let's try it, list tag 1, and let's compile it just to be safe. And I will issue this request again. Yeah, now I get razor compilation error, but you get the point. It just now it actually found the view, but it was not able to process it. So I just if I have my naming conventions right, I can do content negotiation very, very easily. All I have to do is really just return the view and make sure, and Nancy will do everything, and obviously I can replace the actual parts that play part in finding the views or whatever. So okay, we have quite a short of time. Didn't expect that. What's broken here? So you can't really see that. That's a controller. Okay, so we have a standard controller, MVC controller. It says questions controller and an ask action method and an ask input method, like the post. And we have some viewing a question here, another get method. Can someone tell me what's wrong with it? Looks legit, right? It's like standard MVC application. So the single responsibility pattern has been rudely broken here. So this is one big problem with MVC, where you have a controller class, and that controller class has a lot of action methods, and each action method does something completely different. So that's the single responsibility pattern principle, been broken in broad daylight. And a lot of people actually don't like this, because if they want to change the view action method, they now have to change the file that contains also the create action method, and it's a problem. And a lot of people really went and created single action controllers, they called. It's basically one controller having one action method and doing just what it's supposed to do. And it may be easier to do with Nancy, especially definitely with Fubo MVC. ASP.NET MVC is quite hard to walk around to do that. And again, you guys probably do that, and you live. I mean, you live just fine. It doesn't kill you, but it is something that is, to my opinion, it's a bit broken. Some people say it's terribly broken with the MVC pattern. And sorry, I don't have much time. I actually do want to get to other things, but simple.web does this really solve this problem really nicely. It goes to it reverses the way of working. It basically defines one class. It's called a handler instead of having a controller or action. So you have an action method. It's basically now a handler. That handler defines what URL it handles, and again, it treats a website. It basically goes one step further. If back in the day we were accessing ASP files or ASPX files, PHP files, and then we moved to using routing, using all sort of rules. Simple.NET goes one step further into the REST, or what's called the HETERs. It says that whatever URL I get is a resource, and that resource I want to have a handler to handle that. And then on top of that handler, it derives from an interface saying I want to handle that as get, as post, etc. Definitely worth looking at. It does do one other interesting thing. I have the demo on my GitHub repository. what it does is instead of the view or the handler, instead of the controller or the handler actually declaring what view is going to handle that response, and it does content negotiation, but it also goes one step further. It doesn't use actual conventions to find the view. It has the view declare what handler or what resource type it handles. So again, one step further. Really, really interesting, really nice concepts. Moving a bit on, service stack is somewhere in the middle between the approaches that we just talked about in simple.web and Fubo MVC and Nancy. I actually got, you don't see the code here, but I actually got a headache trying to realize where exactly they are positioned. They got me confused, but it also, service stack is basically, it's pretty much like Fubo, the Fubo core project. They provide a lot of stuff, and one of the things that they provide is an MVC web framework that uses all of their other packages. Really efficient, really nice. OpenRasta is just a name dropping. It's a project that should have been restarted. Apparently it hasn't. Again, doing a lot of interesting stuff on top of HTTP and REST APIs. And I really wanted to get to the Java stuff. Web API is pretty much, I think it's some more of a marketing thing than any real framework changes. It's basically saying, I don't want you to return views anymore. I want you to return just JSONs. But the MVC web application builds, I mean, the actual template that you get when you build MVC application, you get web API integrated within that. Microsoft is really highly confused. Allwin is an approach for Microsoft to abstract away a lot of the actual stuff that's going on. It started with MVC and web forms lurking on system.web, the actual system, and this is why we have to use IIS for ASP.NET MVC. Allwin is a project that actually abstracted this away, and you can actually use it's a long way towards full mono support. And Project Kudu is something that you really want to consider if you are deploying. So if you can deploy to App Harbor or to Azure websites if you want to use the cloud. If you want to do this thing of pushing to Git or to your source control and having the code automatically tested and deployed for you, Project Kudu is for you. Let's do 5 minutes of Java things. Sorry about that. So the Java framework, it's really interesting because I couldn't, as you see, it just took us, I don't know, more than an hour to go through the projects in the .NET space. There is quite a lot to discuss, quite a lot of innovation. I couldn't actually find that in Java. So you have the GWT GWT, the Google Web Toolkit, which apparently a lot of huge websites are built on top of it. I think Gmail even uses that to some extent. So you have a lot of really high demanding applications built on top of GWT. Projects like Vaadin are taking this even further and providing more widgets. In their core is the ability to create a website and deliver it once and then have widgets within the website just being transferred around. So you don't send, it's pretty much like a single page application but server based. So you have the widgets, the status of the widgets move around. So it sounds really, really nice until you get to the actual code, and then you don't see, but I can see that it's basically web forms. You create a panel and you add a label, you add a button, you add an event. It's just basically web forms. The second I saw that, I just moved on. You have a lot of projects like that. Apache Wicket and other such projects are basically based on that. And then you have Spring. So Spring MVC is really interesting. You have the MVC pattern and you have the Spring framework actually the MVC is just a small project within the entire framework. And that framework actually has a lot of things. It has model binding, it has validation, IOC, and MVC, again, is just a small part of it. And in the MVC, in MVC part, you actually have a dispatcher servlet that does the entire, that image is from the documentation. It just takes the request and passes it through the different stages of the request lifecycle. It's really nice and interesting. Again, sorry, you can't see the code here. Just standard MVC code. You just read it and be able to figure out just really fast what's going on. It heavily uses attributes. And it has async, it has everything. The main problem with Spring is just it's heavy. It's really, really heavy. It's something that it can bear huge websites. It's very enterprisey, but it's really an overkill. I will not talk about struts. And then we get to the Play framework. Now, the Play framework is really, really nice. However, it's also very, very weird. Let me move my demo. Like that. I have to actually go to an application that is installed somewhere in my system, run the server, and it will load the project. And then, if I get lucky, I can access it through the website, which is here. I can access the website, and it will run. Now, that's nice, but IDE integration is really something that really goes weird there. It's not that I'm using the IDE to compile. What's going on here? I'm not using the IDE to compile on one hand. On the other, there is a really nice integration of that. And the code here is nice, but I have to run an external application, and that application is quite hard to deploy because it doesn't use the built-in, it uses some sort of a build system, but it's not the Maven or Ant or the Java build system that you usually have. No. But what is nice about Play is that, for example, you see that here I have the HiFus thing here. All I have to do if I wanted to change anything is really just change the code, hit Control Save, go here, refresh, and that server that I just ran will be able to detect that one file has changed, and it will compile once I reload. So there is a lot to talk about Play. We are out of time, but this is one thing I really liked about Play. This is the rapid application development thing. You can just go, change files, hit refresh. That's one huge benefit of single-page applications, where you don't have to deploy. You just change, save, and see the actual. As long as you don't have to change the actual discussion with the server. But here you can actually do server development without recompiling. Everything will just recompile automatically for you. That's something I really, really liked. Let's see what we have left. So we have Play, Spark. I will demo this tomorrow. I will show a demo of Spark tomorrow if you want to see. That's basically, again, a Sinatra-inspired micro-web framework, which is basically, you can write a full website within one Java file, and it will just run really efficiently and really nice. Async, you really want to support async. Web API does that really nicely, and that's maybe one of the largest improvements of Web API on top of ASP.NET MVC. And a lot of modern web frameworks actually support async. The thing about async is that you really, in modern days, you really have to have that. Otherwise, you may block on requests. If you get too many requests, you can just get to a point where you block, like in the desktop application, where your GUI thread will hang and your web application will not respond because you didn't use multi-threading. This is basically what can happen if you don't use async in a web server. I also wanted to discuss single page applications. Sorry guys, everything is on my GitHub.